About 35 kilometers southeast of the Polish city of Gdansk, German Danzig. Among picturesque nature, with coniferous forests in the autumn of 1939, the Germans founded the Stutthof internment camp, as it was then called. Representatives of the Polish intelligentsia, prisoners of war, communists, and Jews were initially brought there. The camp grew rapidly, and more victims arrived, both female and male. Production workshops were organized here, and by 1941 the institution was classified as a labor education camp. However, by January 1942, it had become an ordinary concentration camp with all its horrible characteristics. Terrible atrocities. In Stutthof, prisoners were tortured and subjected to medical experiments, burned in crematoria and gassed. In this camp, people were used as raw materials for the production of soap, manufactured according to the method of Dr. Rudolf Spanner. By the way, the Institute of National Remembrance in 2006 tried to refute this fairy tale, as they call it. Imagine the surprise of the researchers when the analysis of the bars of soap that acted as evidence at the Nuremberg trials actually showed the presence of human fat tissue in it. The fascists were very practical. Human bodies were used for soap, human skins for decorative crafts. These monsters utilized every part of their victims for their horrific purposes. However, in this video, we are interested in the female wardens of Stutthof. German Frau and Fräulein, who became notorious for their extreme cruelty in this camp. Aufschicherins. Jenny Wanda Brackman began working in Stutthof in January 1944. She was nicknamed the Beautiful Spectre for her deceptive beauty. Within just over a year, she earned such a notorious reputation for the extreme cruelty in her supervisory role that many prisoners referred to her as the Terrible Ghost. She especially enjoyed the merciless beating of female prisoners, which was her favorite pastime. Hertha Gertrude Both was transferred to Stutthof from Ravensburg in 1942. The prisoners nicknamed her the Stutthof Sadist for the extremely cruel treatment of female prisoners. Lacking physical beauty herself, this Fräulein deliberately targeted attractive prisoners for her abuse. Eva Paradise was German of Polish origin. She began her service in Stutthof in early 1944. She has established herself as an inveterate sadist and torturer. In the cold winter, she ordered female prisoners who didn't like her to strip naked and pour water on them, and forbade them to move. If the prohibition was violated, severe beatings followed. Elizabeth Becker, like Eva, began serving in the concentration camp in early 1944. She was involved in the selection of women and children to be sent to the gas chambers. The principle of selection was known only to her and apparently depended on her mood. She was often walk past a potential victim in the line several times, pretending not to notice them, and then abruptly return and declare, "You," sealing their fate with a single word. Gerda Steinhoff. The date of her appearance in the camp differ. Most likely it was the end of 1943, like Becker. She was involved in the selection of prisoners for gas chambers and medical experiments. And she was very proud of her work. Like her colleagues, she showed cold cruelty to women and children. Her superiors noted her for the diligence and efficiency, and she even was awarded the Medal for Devoted Service. Wanda Klaff was one of the few married guards. She began her service in the Prague concentration camp, where she showed herself as a ruthless sadist. In 1944, she was transferred to Stutthof. By her own admission, she beat at least 2 prisoners every day. For her, it was something like physical exercise. These were, of course, not all the wardens of Stutthof. There were others too. These were the first to appear before the court in 1946. In fact, this was one of the first trials of concentration camp guards. In total, during the existence of this Nazi death camp, 295 so-called Aufschicherin overseer served there. Failed attempts to escape. When the troops of the Red Army began to approach Danzig and Stutthof, the camp servants began to scatter like rats from a ship. However, not everyone managed to hide. The first commandant of Stutthof, SS Standartenführer, was detained and put on trial. Commandant of the Neuengamme concentration camp Max Pauli was detained in the fall of 1945, convicted in May 1946 by an English court in Hamburg, and hanged in October of the same year. The women who attempted to disguise themselves as innocent victims were detained. Soon their immediate superior, SS Oberscharführer Johann Pauls, was also caught. The trial of Nazi criminals took place of the city of Gdansk. on April 26, 1946. There were 16 defendants in the case, employees of the concentration camp, including above-mentioned women. The trial. At the trial, the former guards behaved as if they did not fully believe that they could be seriously punished. They joked, laughed, and flirted with each other. They showed no signs of being troubled by their conscience, and there was not even a shadow of remorse on their faces. At a time when many witnesses at the trial could not hold back their sobs and even lost consciousness, their former tormentors were smiling. On May 31, 1946, the sentences were read out to 16 defendants. 11 of them were sentenced to death, already known to us: Becker, Stutthof, Clough, Brackman, Booth, and Pauls. In addition to them, the so-called capos, camp policemen from prisoners, Joseph Ryder, Waclaw Kozlovsky, František Sapinski, Jan Breed, and Taudas Kapczynski. On July 4, 1946, the death sentence was carried out. All 11 criminals were hanged near Gdansk on Biskupski Gorka. Some shocking details. Convicts were transported to the place of execution in trucks. Ropes were put around their necks, after which the trucks drove off and the sadistic criminals hung from their ropes. During the execution, there were some incidents. The truck on which Jenny Brackman was standing stalled. One of the former male prisoners, and according to other information, female prisoners, possibly both, broke through the guards, jumped into the back, and pushed the beautiful spectre from the truck into the eternity. But it didn't end there. A crowd of people began throwing stones and sticks at the hanging corpses. The security had to try hard to restrain the angry people. The corpses hung there for some time, then they were burned and the ashes were scattered in the unknown place. There is a legend that Braxman's ashes were flushed down the toilet of her apartment. However, this is just a legend. This is how the sadistic guards of the Stutthof concentration camp, its terrible ghost, ended their lives. A well-deserved result for those who have violated all human norms. After this trial, several more trials took place against the guards and supervisors of Stutthof. In January 1947 and in November of the same year, there were two processes at once at the beginning and end of November. Some were sentenced to death, others were given 10-15 years in prison. Some got away from 3 to 5 years, and some even escaped punishment. Thus, the secretary of the commandant of the concentration camp, Irmgard Furchner, was acquitted in court. Then, in the trial, it was considered that she was only doing paperwork and had nothing to do with executions and torture. However, 75 years later, a criminal case was opened against Furchner. Researchers found that Irmgard was aware of all the affairs that were happening in the concentration camp, and it turns out, provided various services to the villainous executioners, which means she helped them, albeit indirectly. She was given a 2-year suspended sentence. The lenient punishment is apparently related to the age of the defendant. Now there is a museum on the site of the concentration camp. During its entire existence, approximately from 110 to 120,000 prisoners passed through it. From 65 to 80,000 of them found their deaths in Stutthof.